Welcome to IQD Dinar News, your go-to source for the latest updates on currency exchange rates, revaluation news, and insights into the Iraqi dinar. Stay informed and ahead of the curve with our timely analysis and breaking developments. The banking sector in Iraq has historically been shaped by the country's political and economic environment. Over the past few decades, Iraq's economy has faced numerous challenges, ranging from sanctions to wars, followed by an unstable political climate that continues to affect its economic stability. Despite being one of the world's largest oil producers, Iraq has struggled with corruption, lack of infrastructure, and an underdeveloped banking system. This context is crucial to understand the dominance of state-owned banks in the country's financial landscape. The statement highlights that 88% of the investments in Iraq's banking sector are controlled by government banks, indicating the vast influence these institutions have on the economy. This also points to an imbalance between state-owned and private banks, which is often a characteristic of economies transitioning from central planning to market-oriented structures. State-owned banks have historically played a central role in Iraq's banking sector. These institutions often serve as conduits for government policies, including the management of oil revenues, funding public projects, and directing credit to certain sectors deemed important for national development. In many developing and post-conflict countries like Iraq, state banks are also seen as instruments for rebuilding the economy after periods of instability. However, this heavy reliance on government banks raises concerns about inefficiencies, lack of competition, and the potential for political influence in lending decisions. The dominance of government banks in the banking sector is not unique to Iraq. In many countries, particularly those with socialist or centrally planned histories, state-owned banks often control the majority of financial assets and investments. The reasoning behind this model is that the government, through these banks, can direct resources to priority sectors like infrastructure, health, or energy, which may not receive adequate funding from the private sector. In Iraq's case, the 88% figure shows that the government, through its banks, has a significant grip on where and how financial resources are invested. This can be beneficial in certain aspects, such as ensuring that critical projects receive funding. However, it can also lead to issues such as inefficiency, corruption, and lack of accountability, which are common problems in government-dominated banking sectors. Moreover, state banks often face less pressure to be profitable, as they are backed by government resources, which can result in suboptimal allocation of investments. The statement mentions the necessity of reforming Iraq's banking system on a market basis, similar to international banks. This highlights a recognition from the government or its advisors that the current system, which is heavily reliant on state-owned banks, may not be sustainable or efficient in the long term. Banking reform is often seen as a crucial step in modernizing an economy, particularly in countries transitioning from a centralized economic model to a more market-based one. A market-based banking system refers to one where financial institutions operate under competitive, market-driven principles, similar to those seen in developed economies. In such systems, banks are expected to compete for customers, manage risks effectively, and allocate resources efficiently. This competition often leads to innovation, improved services, and better access to credit for businesses and individuals. In contrast, Iraq's banking sector, with its heavy reliance on state-owned banks, lacks this level of competition. Private banks, which typically drive innovation and efficiency in market economies, account for only a small portion of the sector. As a result, many potential borrowers, particularly small and medium-sized enterprises, SMEs, may struggle to access credit, as government banks tend to prioritize lending to large state-owned enterprises or government projects. Reforming a banking system that has been dominated by government institutions for decades is not an easy task. There are several challenges that Iraq will likely face in its efforts to transition to a more market-based system. These include, government banks in Iraq are not just financial institutions, they are deeply intertwined with the country's political system. Reforming these banks would likely require reducing the influence of political actors, which can be a contentious issue in any country. Politicians may resist reforms if they perceive them as reducing their control over financial resources. Iraq's banking sector, like many sectors of its economy, has suffered from years of neglect, underinvestment, and institutional weaknesses. Reforms will require building the capacity of both state and private banks to operate under market-based principles. This includes improving risk management practices, increasing transparency, and strengthening regulatory oversight. One of the biggest challenges facing any banking sector reform is building public trust. Iraqis have experienced years of instability, and many may be wary of placing their money in banks, particularly private institutions. Reforms will need to focus on building confidence in the banking system through measures such as deposit insurance, improved banking services, and consumer protection regulations. Modern banking relies heavily on technology, particularly in areas such as digital banking, online transactions, and mobile payments. Iraq's banking sector will need to invest significantly in infrastructure and technology to compete with international banks and offer services that meet the needs of its population. Corruption is a major issue in Iraq's banking sector, as it is in many other sectors of the economy. Efforts to reform the banking system will need to address issues of corruption, which can undermine the effectiveness of reforms and erode public trust in the system. The statement makes a comparison between Iraq's banking system and international banks, suggesting that Iraq should reform its system to operate more like banks in other parts of the world. International banking systems, particularly in developed economies, are characterized by strong regulatory frameworks, competitive markets, and a diverse range of financial institutions. These systems often have a mix of state-owned, private, and cooperative banks, each serving different segments of the market. In many countries, private banks dominate the banking sector, providing a wide range of services to individuals, businesses, and the global financial crisis of 2008, for example, exposed significant weaknesses in some of the world's most developed banking systems. These weaknesses included poor risk management, excessive leverage, and lack of transparency. As Iraq looks to reform its banking sector, it will need to learn from both the successes and failures of international banks to build a system that is resilient, efficient, and capable of supporting economic growth. Reforming Iraq's banking sector will require a multifaceted approach that addresses both the structural weaknesses of the current system and the broader economic challenges facing the country. The government, along with international partners such as the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, IMF, has already begun to implement some reforms aimed at strengthening the banking system. These include measures to improve regulation, enhance the capacity of private banks, and promote financial inclusion. One key area of focus for Iraq's banking reforms should be the development of its private banking sector. While government banks will likely continue to play an important role in the economy, private banks can drive competition, innovation, and efficiency. Encouraging the growth of private banks will require reducing barriers to entry, improving the regulatory environment, and addressing issues of corruption and political influence. Another important area of reform is financial inclusion. Many Iraqis, particularly those in rural areas, do not have access to basic banking services. Expanding access to credit, savings, and other financial services will be crucial for promoting economic development and reducing poverty. This will require investments in infrastructure, particularly in digital banking, as well as efforts to build public trust in the banking system. Finally, Iraq will need to focus on improving the governance and transparency of its state-owned banks. While these banks will likely remain dominant for the foreseeable future, reforms should aim to reduce political influence, improve risk management, and ensure that these institutions operate under market-based principles. Thanks for tuning in to IQD Dinar News. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. For more updates on the Iraqi dinar and global currency trends, hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. See you in the next video.